Hello, and welcome to our pre-departure orientation for UNCW Education Abroad participants. My name is Cara Pike-Inman, and I'm the Director of Education Abroad here at UNCW. I'm going to start out by congratulating you all for making the decision to embark on a study abroad experience. I was a study abroad participant many years ago myself. It changed my life. It's why I do what I do today. And so I congratulate you for taking advantage of this opportunity, and I look forward to working with you throughout the experience. So to begin with, we want to talk about a few important items that you'll want to consider. Number one, if you don't already have your passport, get one as soon as you can. There's a full passport issuing office in the student union. So run over there, get your passport, and if you don't have one at this point in time, you may want to actually expedite it just to make sure that you get it in plenty of time. If you do already have a passport, dig it out of that drawer or closet or wherever it's hiding and check the expiration date, because you will want to make sure that your passport is valid for at least 6 months past the end of your program. And if it's not going to be valid for that long, you'll want to go ahead and renew it. So number one, we want to make sure you have a valid passport because you need that to leave the country and you need it to get back in. So it's a really important item. Number two is that for some of you, you will need student visas for where you're going to be studying. In most cases, our office or a program provider will provide you with information about how to get those student visas, or maybe a cultural exchange visa or residency permit, something similar. And if that's something that you need, be sure to embark on that experience immediately. Follow the steps. Be very careful with how you follow the steps, because you will need to make sure you follow all those steps completely. But if that is something you're going to need for your program, be sure to start on that as soon as you get those instructions from our office. And then the last thing I want to mention quickly is that at some point before you depart for your program, you will get an email generated by our office, but it's going to come from HTH Health Insurance. That's the health insurance that UNCW uses for all students who study abroad. You will be enrolled in that health insurance for the duration of your program abroad. And when you get that email, be sure to go ahead and log in using the information included in that email and log in and register for your health insurance. And that way we can make sure you're covered for whatever might happen while you're abroad. All right, so a quick little caveat is we want to talk a little bit about your responsibilities versus your parents. Some of you might think, oh great, I can zone out for the rest of this orientation because mom and dad are going to take care of everything for me. And while that may be able to happen at home, when you're abroad, chances are pretty good mom and dad aren't going to be there, and this is an experience that you are really going to need to be responsible for. For some of you, this could be a pretty exciting thing, that it might be the first time that you're away from mom and dad, you're really exerting your independence, and this can be a really incredible opportunity for growth for a lot of students. But we want you to pay attention. We want to make sure that you understand your experience, because you're the one that's going to go through it. You're the one who needs to know how to register for classes and how to stay legal abroad and all of those types of things. So we want to make sure that you pay attention. We're always happy to speak with parents if they want to call or email our office, but we really want you to take ownership for this experience. All right, so now on to some more fun stuff. Let's talk about packing. So when you think about packing, the number one thing that we want you to do is to research the types of luggage that you're able to bring on your airline. Each airline has different regulations in terms of how big your luggage can be and how many bags you can bring. So make sure that you do that research. And make sure you do that research not only about your big international flight, but also about any subsequent flights that you might have within your host country. We sometimes have students who fly all the way to Australia with their 2 huge suitcases and then hop on a little puddle jumper flight to their host destination and find out they can't bring those 2 enormous suitcases on that flight without incurring some pretty big penalties, or sometimes they're not actually allowed to bring them because they're too big. So make sure you've done that research so you don't have any of those fun snafus immediately upon arrival. I also encourage you to think about what type of luggage you want to bring. You might want to bring those 2 big suitcases for your experience, but if you're just going to go on a little weekend excursion somewhere, you probably don't want to bring your biggest suitcase with you. So think about what types of luggage is going to make the most sense for the type of traveling you're doing and for the duration of your program. Some important things with packing is that you are going to want to make sure that you have a copy of your passport, copy of your visa, any other important documents. Put those photocopies in your checked luggage, keep the originals with you, and that way, in case you misplace any of those items, you will have a copy of them and it can more easily get replaced. If you are somebody who takes medication on a regular basis, we encourage you to talk to your doctor as soon as possible to see if you can either get a dose of your medication for the full duration of your program abroad, Or if that isn't possible, talk to our office and we can try to put you in touch with a healthcare provider abroad to make sure you can get your medication. One other thing to think about if you're someone who takes medication for maybe some sort of mental health issues is we'll want to make sure that the medication you're on is legal abroad. Some medications, for example, Adderall, might not be legal in certain countries. So if that's the case, we want to make sure that we can find a substitute for you and get you on something that's going to keep you healthy and feeling your best throughout the duration of your time abroad. I also encourage you to put a change of clothes in your carry-on. You don't want to be the smelly kid when you first get there. Nobody wants to be that kid. So have a change of clothes, maybe a toothbrush, that sort of thing also in your carry-on, just in case your luggage doesn't quite arrive at the same time as you do. Do some research into the places that you're going. Find out, what do people wear to class there? What do people wear when they're going out to clubs? Here in Wilmington, I can wear jeans or shorts and flip-flops pretty much anywhere I want to go. If I want to go out dancing in London, I'm not going to get into a club in jeans or shorts or flip-flops. So think about what you might need to wear and what you might need to pack to fit in where you're going, and also just to make sure that you're warm enough or cool enough for the climate of the place you're going. For a lot of you, you're going to be doing a lot more walking abroad than you do here at UNCW, so comfortable pair of walking shoes is always a great addition to your packing list. And again, do research and find out what the norms are where you're going. And one final packing tip is that with any electronics that you might be bringing, most other countries have different electrical currents and different plugs than we do here in the US. There are kind of some Central American exceptions to that, but if you're going to Europe, you're going to Australia, you're going to Africa, you're going to find very different plugs and different electrical currents than we have here in the US. And so you will want to buy some plug adapters, or in some cases, even some current converters to make sure that your electronics can work okay abroad. And then also just realize that people live all the places that you're going to study. People live there every day. So if you forget something, it's not the end of the world. You can buy another shirt, you can buy a toothbrush. These things exist all over the world. So sometimes students get pretty anxious about packing, and if you forget something, it's really okay. You can probably buy something very similar abroad to substitute it. Many of you have flown quite a bit. For some of you, this may be your first time on a plane or your first overseas trip. TSA regulations only let you bring little 3-ounce bottles or containers of liquids, gels, anything like that, and they have to be within a quart-sized Ziploc bag. So if you're somebody, I wear contacts, I have to have my contact solution with me, or I think I'm going to die, you need whatever other liquids it is that you need with you, make sure you have them in 3-ounce or less containers and in a Ziploc bag, and that way you can easily take those with you. If you have bigger liquids, toiletries, things like that you're bringing with you, those can go in your checked luggage, but in your carry-on, nothing bigger than 3 ounces of liquid. So once you have packed and you've actually gotten abroad, we want to make sure that all of you know what happens upon arrival. Is someone picking you up? Do you need to take a train or a bus or something like that, or a taxi to your host destination? Be sure you know what happens, and be sure you know who to contact in the event that your flight is delayed or is canceled. If you have a host family waiting there to pick you up and your flight's not going to arrive until 4 hours after it's supposed to, you want to make sure that you've been able to tell them that. So make sure you know what happens when you arrive and who to contact if you're not going to be arriving when you were slated to originally arrive. Once you get abroad, we also encourage you to understand what sort of transportation is available. Are there buses? Are there trains? Is there a metro or a subway system of some sort? And the more quickly that you can really become familiar with that and become used to using that public transportation system, or maybe it's walking, maybe that's how people get around where you are. Figure that out, and the more quickly you can assimilate into that means of getting around, the more quickly you're going to be able to really enjoy your host destination. So in terms of housing, you all are going to be staying in a big array of different types of housing. Some of you are in field stations in the Amazon, some of you are staying with host families, some of you are in hotels or hostels, and some of you are in more dorm or apartment style housing. I encourage you to learn as much as you can about your housing before you go. I think sometimes students have this perception that they're going to go abroad and they're going to live in Hogwarts and it's going to be this magical experience, and that's probably not the case. We have pretty nice housing here at UNCW, and your housing abroad may be a little bit more Spartan than what you're used to. So I think if you can have really realistic expectations about what your housing is going to be like, it's going to make your experience go more smoothly. And also try to figure out, is there bedding included in your housing, or is there a way that you can order bedding to have it ready when you arrive? If you are going to be staying in hostels, they may not include things like sheets or towels. So do you want to bring a set of those with you, or are those things that you can rent in different places you'll be staying? So again, the more research you can do before you leave, the better off you'll be. And for those of you who will stay with host families, you may even want to think about packing a small gift for your host family, something that represents you or UNCW or North Carolina or whatever state it is that you're from. That might be a nice gesture, is to have some sort of gift from home for your host family. So moving on to communication. Most of you are able to communicate with your family and friends pretty readily from wherever you are. I know students always have their cell phones attached to their hip. Communication may be very different where you're going, and again, this is something I encourage you to research. Talk to the study abroad ambassadors who have studied in your location, if there are study abroad ambassadors who've studied in your location, and talk to them about what they did and how they kept in touch with their families. If you're somebody who has an iPhone or something like that, you can probably pretty easily FaceTime anytime that you have access to Wi-Fi. Skype is a wonderful way that you can communicate for free from computer to computer if you are in a Wi-Fi zone. But also find out, is there Wi-Fi where you're living, and when will it be available? Sometimes students think that the second that they get into their apartment or their house or wherever they're going to stay, they're going to be able to have access to Wi-Fi, and sometimes that's something that you actually have to get set up, and you may not have it for a few days. So the more you can learn about those types of things, again, the smoother your transition will be. There are lots of great apps that exist out there that you can text for free between phone to phone using Wi-Fi. There are sometimes calling cards. Those are becoming more obsolete all the time. You can of course keep a blog, you can do Facebook, but I encourage you to think about how you plan to keep in touch with family and friends. And many students even choose to buy like a little pay-as-you-go or track phone when they're abroad, that has a local number so that they can easily keep in touch with their Spanish friends or their Chilean friends using text messages, rather than making those Chilean friends be texting or calling a US number and incurring big international charges. So there's lots of different opportunities of how you can keep in touch with people while you're abroad, and I encourage you to research and look at which one of those is going to be the best fit for you. I also encourage you to be mindful about the frequency of communication that you have with people back home. Every year I have students that have studied abroad and they come back and they're talking to me and they say, you know what, my biggest regret is that I spent so much time on my computer or on my phone communicating with people back home, that I feel like I missed out on some of the experience abroad. I would hate for that to be you, and so I hope you can find a balance between still feeling connected to home but really feeling like you're able to engage in your host destination. For some students, they're able to find that by doing a blog. That way every single person who wants to keep up with them can read what's going on, and they don't have to feel like they have to individually message a bunch of different people. Some people do that via mass emails or Facebook posts. So think about what's going to work for you, and think about how you're still going to be able to engage in your host environment. We also encourage you to really think about the types of messages that you put out via different modes of communication. Sometimes students are having a bad day, they call mom and dad and they are venting and they're frustrated, and sometimes that gets translated into, oh my gosh, my student is having a terrible experience, they want to come home. That's what the parent calls and tells us. By the time we contact you, you're like, no, I'm having a great time, I want to stay an extra term, but I was just having a bad day. So make sure that you're really clear with your communication that you're having. Same thing via social media. Sometimes students think that it's fun to put very dramatic posts on social media, oh, I'm homeless on the other side of the world, when really it just means that you got to the place you're visiting for the weekend at noon and your hotel doesn't open until 3. Well, you're not homeless, you just have to hang out for a couple hours. So think about the implications that those sorts of messages may have on people back home, and really try to be mindful of that. Speaking of social media, we do have social media for UNCW Study Abroad, and we would love to hear from you while you're abroad. You can also personally friend your advisor, and we love to keep up with your travels and see all the wonderful adventures that you're having. So talking about money, it's always one of the biggest questions we get is, how can I make this affordable? How can I access money abroad? If you have a debit card or a credit card and it has a Visa logo, a MasterCard logo, Cirrus or Plus symbol, chances are pretty good that's going to work just about anywhere you would want to travel. I've been to about 40 countries and my debit card has worked in every single one of those that I've been to. So chances are pretty good yours will too. But what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to call your debit cards and your credit cards before you travel abroad to let them know where you're going to be staying and any other countries to which you'll be traveling. And that way they can mark that on their account, and when all of a sudden a charge appears in South Africa, they don't think it's fraud. They know that you're actually studying there, and they know that it may be a legitimate charge. Sometimes, even if you've told your bank, sometimes they might still put a hold on your account if they forget that you've communicated that with them. So I always encourage you when you first arrive in a destination to have some money available in cash that you can exchange cash to cash so that you can get by for a couple days. But that would just give you enough leeway to contact your bank and let them know, hey, this really is me trying to make those charges, and make sure your card gets unfrozen. Also, be sure to write those numbers that are on the back of your credit card that say, if lost or stolen, please call this number. Well, if your card is lost or stolen, you probably don't have that number. So make sure you have it written down in a location other than where you keep your credit and debit card, so that should you happen to misplace that card while you're abroad, you can easily call and get it canceled before a bunch of charges are racked up on your behalf. In terms of other forms of money, we do encourage that students do try to have a credit card just in case of emergency. You never know what might come up, and that way you have that emergency source of funds. Your parents back in their day, if they've traveled abroad, they may have used traveler's checks. They were very popular when I embarked on my initial education abroad experiences. But traveler's checks are fairly obsolete. They're not accepted very many places, and students tend to find that they aren't very popular means of making transactions. With regard to using your debit card, our general rule of thumb is that if you go to an ATM abroad, you will get out money in the local currency. And we encourage you to get out a large enough sum of money that you aren't going to have to go back to the bank the next day, because you may be incurring some pretty hefty ATM fees for using ATM if it's not a sister bank of your home bank. But to take out a large enough sum that you won't have to come back the next day, but not to take out such a big sum that if it were to get lost or stolen, that you would be completely up a creek. So figure out what kind of that nice middle point is for you. We also encourage you to do some research into what the exchange rate is in the country to which you'll be traveling. Sometimes when I travel, I even make myself a little cheat sheet of $5 equals this many of whatever the local currency is, and $10 equals this much, until I get used to making those conversions in my head. And also continue to monitor those exchange rates throughout the time that you're abroad if you're a student that's going for a longer term program, because those could fluctuate quite a bit over the duration of your time that you're studying abroad. If you are a student that's on a budget, think about your spending choices. I've been to Ireland several times. I've taken students there, and sometimes students decide they want to enjoy a pint of Guinness. A pint of Guinness is about $8, and if they have 4 of those, they could have just bought a ticket from Ireland to Spain for the same amount that they just consumed a lot of carbs. So think about what your priorities are and what you want to spend your money on. If your priority is food, go out for nice dinners. If it's not, go to a grocery store. You know, a bag of apples and a loaf of bread can last you for quite a long time, and it can cost you about $5. So think about what's important to you in making those spending choices. And if you need to set a budget and stick to it, absolutely do so. With regard to using financial aid, if you get financial aid at UNCW and you'd be eligible for financial aid for the term during which you've been abroad, you absolutely can take that money with you. Our office also has grants and scholarships. By now the deadline for those has probably passed, but if you do engage in a future program, we hope you apply for those. But if you do typically get regular grants, loans, or scholarships at UNCW, you do get to take that money with you typically when you study abroad. Talk to the Office of Financial Aid. Their information is located on this slide, and get in touch with them if you have any questions about how your financial aid works. So speaking of academics, in addition to being able to take courses that will apply towards graduation, you also have the opportunity to satisfy the explorations beyond the classroom requirement for graduation by studying abroad. There are many ways that this requirement can be satisfied, and studying abroad is one of them. If you want to satisfy the explorations beyond the classroom requirement for graduation by studying abroad, you're going to need to set up an e-portfolio, and there's instructions online about how to do this. And basically, you create 3 different artifacts. One is a little essay or a product that you create before you go about what you hope to get out of your experience, your expectations, that kind of thing. One is an artifact that you create while you're abroad, and then one is an artifact that you create after you get back, and you upload those 3 things into this e-portfolio. That's managed by the University Studies Curriculum Committee, not by our office, so any questions about that specifically can be addressed online or should be addressed to them. So thinking about how you're going to adapt to your new environment abroad. Some students adapt very seamlessly in terms of cross-cultural adaptation, and some students can suffer from a little bit of culture shock. Culture shock is a very real thing. I've traveled a lot, I've traveled for a long time, and I still experience culture shock when I travel. It's a very normal thing, so don't think that there's anything wrong with you or weird if you do experience any kind of culture shock. Culture shock is something that affects each student differently. For some students, the minute they hit the ground and things are different and the food is different, maybe the language is different, the culture is different, they immediately experience some sort of culture shock. Other students hit the ground and they say, oh my gosh, I'm abroad, I'm experiencing this place that I've always wanted to go, and they're on this euphoric high. And maybe a week later, when they're still trying to figure out how to communicate with home and struggling to get the right classes that they want, maybe that's when it hits them a little bit more. So it hits each student differently and at different points in time. The most important thing, if you do experience culture shock, is what we want to do is we want to stick ourselves in our room and we want to communicate with people back home. And that's actually the worst thing you can do when you're experiencing culture shock. The best thing that you can do is to get out, to be around people, to be social, and to experience the location that you went abroad to experience. None of you are sitting here watching this video saying, gosh, I'm so excited to go abroad so I can sit in a room and Skype. That's not why you're going abroad. You could do that from home. You're going abroad because there's a place you want to see, or a sporting event you want to experience, or a food you want to try, or something that you want to achieve from this experience. So make a list, if you need to, of those things that you want to experience while you're abroad. And when you're feeling down or you're feeling culture shock, say, what can I crank off my list? And then go achieve that experience. Also, the more that you can learn about the culture that you're going to before you go, I think the easier transition you're going to have. I encourage all of you to do research about where you're going. If you met someone who was studying abroad here in the United States from another country and they didn't know who our president was, or they didn't know that Washington, D.C. was our capital, you would probably think they crawled out from under a rock. So know, who is their political leader? What's their currency? Who is one of their sports heroes or their musical heroes? Or what cultural arts are popular there? What are some big historic events? I think the more you can learn about the places you're going, the more interesting they become. So I encourage you to learn a little bit about the places you're going. I also encourage you to try to learn a little bit of the language for anywhere where you're either going to study or where you're going to travel. If you have worked in a shop or a restaurant here in the US and you had somebody just come up and start speaking at you in another language, you'd probably be a little bit freaked out. But if that same person came up to you and maybe was holding a map and just said, like, please help, you would immediately be like, oh my gosh, cute little foreigner versus scary foreigner that's creeping me out. And all they had to say was 2 words. And you would probably do whatever you could to help that person out. So be the sweet little foreigner, don't be the creepy one. Learn some of the language, and I think that will endear you to the people with whom you're interacting. And even if all you learn is please, thank you, hello, goodbye, good evening, that can make a huge difference. So try to learn some of the local languages for any country to which you travel. Some other things to think about when you're traveling is that we all like to take pictures. We live in an age where we want to put the picture on Facebook that gets 8 million likes, or we want to put the picture on Instagram that everybody loves. But be careful what you take pictures of. I've been in some situations where I've wanted to take pictures of a port, or maybe there was something interesting happening in an airport, but behind whatever was happening there was airport security. I almost got my camera taken from me once in Morocco because I was taking a picture of a cute little kitten that had wandered into the airport, but behind the cute little kitten was airport security and I wasn't allowed to take a picture of that, so almost lost my camera. Same thing, it might look like a pretty port, but it may actually be where military warships are, and you can't take pictures of that. So be aware of what you're taking pictures of. And I don't currently have children, but I can tell you if I had children, I wouldn't want random foreigners taking pictures of them. That would make me a little weirded out by them. So don't take pictures of people's children without asking permission. Same thing, we like to take pictures of homeless people or gypsies or that sort of thing. Don't take pictures of photos of people without permission. So I encourage you to ask permission in those situations. I also encourage you to be aware of holidays, elections, sporting events, things like that are happening in your host community. In a lot of places, when there's an election, nothing's open. Transportation may be shut down, or there may be a strike. Know what's going on, because you may not be able to get across town, or certain places may not be open on that day. So be aware of your surroundings and be aware of what's going on in your community. Sporting events are good to know about. I've been on lots of trains after sporting events with many inebriated people, and I may not have known if their team won or lost, but I knew they were very inebriated and I didn't always feel real safe. Certain sporting events can have an even more heightened sense of that. So be aware of when those types of things are going on. Also, do some research into what is appropriate attire to wear wherever you're going. I've been to Rome several times, and every single time there's a disgruntled bunch of tourists standing outside of St. Peter's Basilica at the Vatican because they're either wearing a sleeveless shirt or a skirt that comes above their knees or shorts, and you can't go into the Vatican wearing any of those items. Your shoulders and knees need to be covered. So make sure that you're wearing attire that's going to allow you to see those sites. Same thing, a lot of you will be going to Europe and maybe traveling to places in North Africa or the Middle East, or maybe you're studying in North Africa or the Middle East. And there may be a certain level of modesty that's expected in terms of the attire worn in those areas. So do some research and be sure that you're dressing in culturally appropriate ways. Also, I encourage you to do some research about how the U.S. has been involved in your host country in terms of economic things, historic events, political relationships. People abroad tend to know a lot more about the U.S. than we tend to know about them. So being aware of those types of things may help you avoid some uncomfortable situations or conversations. I also encourage you to be aware of your body language. Thumbs up means up yours in some countries. This okay symbol, I may have just told you you were worthless. I may have been making a sign that indicated money, or I may have just called you a really vulgar slang word. None of those mean okay in certain locations. Showing the bottom of your foot, if you're a male who sits with your legs crossed, or a female sits with your legs crossed, and you may show the bottom of your foot and it may point towards someone. That's a really terrible slander, because you're saying that person is about as worthless as the dirty bottom of your foot in some Middle Eastern areas. Some people may stand closer. Eye contact in some Asian countries is actually meaning that you're being aggressive or indignant. It's not a sign of respect or that you're paying attention. So do some research into what body language is common or appropriate, or what certain body language means in the countries that you're going to, and that way you can be sure to make a good impression and not leave with a black eye unintentionally. Also, try to do some research into what the values are in your host country. The first time I went to Belize, I stayed with a host family, and the host family I stayed with didn't have electricity, they didn't have running water, there were no doors on their homes, they didn't have beds for all of their family members, and they talked to me about how there was no poverty in Belize. And I was a little shocked by this, because I was like, you people are pretty doggone poor. But then they explained to me that in Belize, they have community. No one is hungry. They have chickens, they have mangoes, they have bananas growing outside. And so no one was poor there. They all had a community and they all had plenty to eat. And that was a wonderful thing once I was able to see things through their eyes and not through my American, what are you talking about? You don't even have a TV, of course you're poor, view of the world. So try to learn the values of your host country culture. Also, try to do some research about how your identity might be viewed abroad. For some of you, it may be the first time you're in a racial minority. For some of you, it may be the first time you're in a racial majority. For some of you who have different parts of your identity related to gender, sexual orientation, religion, think about how those may be perceived abroad. And the more that you can be prepared for how you may be perceived in your host country, I think the more comfortable experience you're going to have. So if you do have any issues with adjusting to your host culture or any challenges that arise while you're abroad, please know that our office staff is on call all the time. Campus Police has a phone tree of all of our office staff, so we can be reached 24 hours a day. And so you have the resources of our office staff and also the resources of the Office of the Dean of Students. When you study abroad, you continue to be a UNCW student, you continue to be enrolled here on campus. So if there's anything that our office or the staff at the Office of the Dean of Students can do to support you, please let us know. On the flip side of that, should you choose to participate in behaviors abroad that are considered a disruption to the program, that violate UNCW's Code of Student Life or the Code of Student Life at the university you might be attending abroad, there could be judicial repercussions back here at UNCW in terms of campus conduct violations. We know that you all are going to go abroad and you're going to be wonderful ambassadors in terms of representing yourselves in UNCW, North Carolina, the US, in terms of the way you represent yourselves abroad. But should you choose to behave in ways that are not a good representation, please know that there could be some repercussions back here on campus. So number one thing that we want you to achieve from your time abroad is we want you to stay healthy and to be safe. So a few things that you can do before you go abroad can help you achieve that. Number one, we encourage all of you just to have a general physical and to see your dentist before you go abroad. Most of you are probably much more comfortable with the US healthcare system than you might be in the location where you're going to be studying or traveling. So if you can get that cavity filled or go see your doctor before you leave, that may be a much more comfortable experience than having to have those things dealt with while you're abroad. For some of you, there may be certain vaccinations that you need to get when you travel abroad. For the destinations where most of our students go, simple measles, mumps, rubella, the types of things you had to have to come to UNCW are all that's required. But if you are studying in certain locations, there may be vaccines that you need to get. And so there are some websites available where you can research what those are. The CDC, the Center for Disease Control website, is a wonderful one. World Health Organization is another one, and you can just look for traveler vaccinations on those websites, and it will let you know exactly what you need for those locations and even some that just may be recommended. In addition to getting those checkups before you go abroad, like I mentioned before, we want to make sure that you have a supply of any medications that you take and that you have them for the duration of your time abroad. If that's something with which our office can assist you, please let us know, and we're happy to assist you with finding either a generic substitute for your current medication, a legal substitute for your medication, or putting you in contact with a healthcare provider abroad through which you can get your medication for the duration of your time abroad. One other thing with regarding to packing any medications is I encourage you to have them in their original container. A Ziploc baggie full of pills looks pretty suspicious, so you don't want to have that when you're going through customs, so make sure that any medications are in their original prescription container. And I encourage you to have those in your carry-on luggage. This may seem silly, but sexually transmitted diseases like HIV are everywhere around the world. This is not only a US problem. We don't want you to bring home any permanent souvenirs in the form of any lovely diseases or pregnancies or babies being left in other countries. So please make good decisions in terms of your sexual health while you're abroad. We encourage you to think about what makes you feel healthy when you're here at UNCW. It may be a certain diet that you participate in. It may be exercising regularly. It may be a certain amount of sleep that you need. It may be a certain amount of sunlight or vitamin D that you like to try to get that make you feel your best. A lot of times we find that students get abroad and they change the way they eat, they change their sleeping habits, all of those things, and they don't feel as healthy. So think about what makes you feel your best when you're here at UNCW and try to engage in those same things while you're abroad. My favorite topic to talk about, traveler's diarrhea, happens to a lot of people. And basically what it is that we have different bacteria in our water here in the US than most countries abroad have in their water. And so all it is your stomach reacting to slightly different bacteria. And this is something that happens to international travelers when they come here to the US as well. It's not just something that we as Americans experience when we travel abroad. You may want to pack some Imodium or something similar in your suitcase just in case you do experience this. Realize it's very normal and it typically does pass fairly quickly. So it may be something that you have the joy of experiencing. All right, so I want to talk quickly about mental health. We've already talked some about prescriptions, but I also, for those of you who experience challenges with mental health, or maybe you just tend to be a little bit anxious, I want you to think about your experience and talk through your experience with a counselor, with a family member, with one of our advising staff, because again, the more you can prepare, the smoother experience you're going to have. We want you to think about how you're going to keep in touch with your support network while you're abroad, maybe to think about how you can create a support network in the location where you're going to be studying, and also think about what are some of the triggers that you may experience regarding your mental health, and how you're going to, again, be able to stay as healthy as possible while you're abroad. And so think of some coping mechanisms that you can employ while you're studying abroad. You may also want to do some research into what type of mental health services are available in your study abroad destination. Counseling services are covered through our HGH health insurance in which you'll be enrolled. But in some countries, mental health is viewed very differently than it is here in the US. You may also want to do some thinking about how mental health is perceived in your host destination. Again, if you have any questions with regard to this, please talk to our office or please talk to one of the staff members in the counseling center. Additionally, and I referred to this briefly earlier, we want you to think about your identity and how your identity may be perceived abroad. There are many aspects of your identity that may be challenged abroad or may be perceived very differently in the location where you're studying. So again, be aware of maybe what the prevailing sentiments are in your host destination about somebody with your aspects of your identity, and consider how you can avoid confrontations related to your identity while you're abroad. Again, if this is something you want to talk through with our office staff, we're always happy to meet with you. So you just watched a short video about alcohol use abroad. Most of you will be legal to consume alcohol in the locations where you are, and we hope that if you choose to partake in alcohol consumption, that you choose to do so responsibly. On a side note, drugs abroad are a whole different issue. In many countries around the world, drugs are punishable by death. Whether you're caught with them, you're caught with paraphernalia, you're caught using them, anything like that, there can be some very severe consequences. If you break the law abroad, whether it's related to drugs or anything else, there's nothing that our office can do, that the Office of the Dean of Students, UNCW, the US, state of North Carolina, there's nothing that we can do to get you out of it. You're going to be under the jurisdiction of the country that you're in. And there could be, like I said, very severe consequences, even death for certain violations. It's not a phone call I want to make to mom and dad. Hey, Jimmy got caught with weed, now he's going to be put before a firing squad. Not going to be a good day. So make good decisions, know the laws in the country in which you're studying, and we hope that none of you will have issues related to this while you're studying abroad. So in terms of just general safety abroad, in your Education Abroad Handbook, which some of you may have received a hard copy of and others may have received electronically, there are lots of tips about how to stay safe while you're abroad. And these may just be small things like pickpocketing, as well as physical safety. Employ just general vigilance. I don't walk by myself at night in Wilmington. I wouldn't do that in wherever your destination abroad is either. Try to stay in groups at night. Try to be aware of your surroundings. Don't go into an empty subway car. Try to go into one where there are other people. When I go abroad, I either have a purse with 2 straps so that if somebody were to come and cut one, there's a secondary strap, or a strap that goes across my body so that it can't easily be snatched off my shoulder. So if you're somebody who's going to be carrying a purse or a bag, those might be things to consider. Have a bag that zips on the top or has a flap and a zipper. I've been to, like I said, almost 40 countries. I've never been pickpocketed except in the US. So while it can happen abroad, it can just as easily happen here, but with some vigilance, hopefully you won't have any issues while you're abroad. Again, just try to remain really cognizant of your surroundings, and if your gut tells you something's not right, try to find a safe space or get help. Some other safety tips is that I encourage all of you to know what the equivalent of 911 is in your host country. If you experience an emergency here, you know from the time you're little, hey, dial 911. Well, 911 isn't universal. Sometimes it's 999, sometimes it's 119, sometimes it's some completely different number. But every country has an emergency number, so make sure you know what that is in your host country. We also encourage you, if you're traveling away from your program site, so maybe you're studying in a destination, you're going to be traveling away for the weekend, make sure that somebody knows. Either make sure that our office knows. If you're on a faculty-led program, make sure your faculty leader knows. Or if you're at a host university, make sure you've notified someone at your host university. And the reason we want to make sure of this is that if there happens to be an earthquake or a bombing or some sort of natural disaster or political unrest, we want to know if you're there. We don't want to say, oh, we have no students in that city, when you actually happen to be traveling there that weekend. So make sure that somebody knows your whereabouts, and make sure again that's somebody either at the university or abroad or here at UNCW. Some additional travel and safety reminders, and this is all in your handbook, is we encourage you to register with the nearest consulate or embassy abroad. What that enables them to do is they are going to know that, hey, we have an American studying in this destination. And so if there is anything, whether it's an outbreak of bird flu or it's a hurricane that's headed that way or whatever might be occurring, it's going to let them know that there's an American there, and if there's any need for evacuation or services, they're going to be able to assist. It's also going to just give you alerts if there is going to be some sort of political demonstration or something like that happening in the location where you're studying. It will alert you, hey, there's this political demonstration happening in downtown Athens, Greece on this date, so I'm just going to avoid that part of town that day. And that can be a wonderful way to get those alerts and to stay safe while you're studying abroad. Again, we encourage you to research the countries you're going to and keep up to date on current events that are occurring in those locations. In your Education Abroad Handbook, as well as on this slide, there are a number of resources that you may want to consult for more information about staying safe abroad or learning about the countries in which you're going to study. Thank you all for hanging in there and for being so attentive. We hope you have a wonderful experience abroad, and we look forward to hearing about all of your adventures when you get back. Thank you.